is very fast paced. I saw something online today where it was somebody said something about the middle of 2025, and somebody said, I don't really remember the individual years since 2020 when we had the whole pandemic. And so it seems like things have just been going extremely fast day after day after day for adults and kids alike these days. We spend our days, and again, this is largely by choice, but we spend our days running from home to work, to school, to practices, to meetings, to dinner, and then to bed, right? That's pretty much how our days go. And weekdays are not a lot different from weekends, right? The weekends we kind of think about as a time to slow down, but on the weekends, I think our calendars are perhaps even more full than our weekdays sometimes. And we make plans weeks and months and sometimes even years in advance. I was laughing a little bit with Carlos and Ben. We have a trip coming up, and I pulled out my itinerary a couple of nights ago, or maybe it was yesterday. And the pastor joked and asked from the front the other day who plans the trips in our family. It's definitely me. And I pulled out this folder, and Ben was like, "Oh, I'm glad we're flexible." Right? Because I have pages of what I think is going to happen or what I would like to happen on our trip coming up. And so, again, I understand things may not turn out that way, but I'm a planner. But we plan things, right? We plan things way in advance. Even in school today, they ask kids what they want to be when they grow up, right? That's nothing new. But now, even in elementary school, I hear teachers sometimes asking kids like where they want to go to college. I've got first graders don't know what college is, right? But they're asking, right? And it's just this idea that we look ahead and we plan and we try to get too far ahead of ourselves sometimes. And we complain about the busyness of life, but then at the same time, we almost pride ourselves in how busy we are, right? We like to put on social media, we put on Facebook or Instagram, all the activities that our kids are involved in, and maybe the extra work or the extra jobs that we take on or the trips that we take. And we post our activities for everybody to see, right? It's almost like we take pride in the fact that we do all of these things. Someone says that busyness is the American Idol, right? Busyness is the American Idol. Technology has contributed to that too. The world has gotten smaller because of technology. The world has gotten more complex, and the world has sped up because of technology. Like, we live in a faster paced lifestyle than generations before us did. And I do believe somehow that the generations that come after us are going to live an even faster paced lifestyle than what we live in. I don't know how that's going to happen because we seem very busy, but it does seem that over the course of time, we just get busier. Things just go faster. Associated with that, there's limited boundaries between work and family time. And I know I'm guilty of this sometimes, maybe more than sometimes. Sometimes, a lot of times, I sit down in the evening on my computer while we're together, as a family. And certainly, maybe someone's watching a show on TV. I'm on my computer doing work stuff, and we're together, but there's not a lot of separation between work time and family time, right? And that's something that I'm guilty of. Or we're constantly engaged with social media. We talk about those people that we've seen in restaurants, a whole family gathered around the table, and everybody has their phone out. They're all together, but they're not really together, right? They're together in person, but they're not really together mentally. And we're constantly engaging with emails and advertisements to purchase things or do things. And we're usually focused on what we're going to do next or what's coming next instead of what's happening now, right? Instead of living in the moment. Because in this world, everyone is mobile, right? And every minute is pretty much scheduled in this world that we live in. And so when I started thinking about slowing down and I started thinking about what our rest looks like, right? What does rest look like? How long do you really sit down and rest? Or do you sit down and rest, but you're doing something while you're resting? You sit down to rest after work, but you've got your phone out. Maybe you're laying on your bed, but you've got your phone or you've got your tablet. Are you really resting? Are you really resting? Or how long is it when you sit down before your mind starts running into like what you got to do when you get up? Or, oh, I've got 15 minutes to lay here and chill before I got to be at this next place, or before I got to pick the kids up or before I've got to go do this job. And so it's like we're hardwired to be in a hurry. We're hardwired to be in a hurry. And it's this unsustainable pace of living, right? We're always in a rush, physically or mentally. And it's hard for us to slow down. And there's some negative impacts associated with that. Your stress increases, Your stress level actually increases. There's physiological things that happen when we're extremely busy. Our blood pressure even increases. That's a known. Our pastor talked about that, right? That's a known fact, right? I mean, all sorts of anatomical things happen just as a result of stress when we're constantly living this life at full speed, right? Your energy gets depleted quickly. Your immune system goes down even faster when we're really stressed. And so that's a negative effect of this fast-paced life. Another negative impact is that joy is lost, right? You lose your joy. I was thinking about this as I was reading and studying for this, and was talking about the faster that you live in this life, the faster that you move in this life, the less time you have to enjoy it. The faster you move, the less time you have to enjoy it. And it was talking about travel. I love to travel. I was talking about travel. And if you get on a plane and you fly somewhere at a really fast speed, sure, you can get there quickly, but you don't really enjoy anything along the way, right? Because you're going so fast. You don't enjoy the scenery. You see takeoff and then you see landing, but you miss everything in between. You cover miles and miles and miles, but you miss everything in between. So you miss the joy of that. If you're driving down the interstate, sure, you may it takes a little less time, a little more time than flying, but you're driving 70 to 80 miles an hour down the interstate. You see a few more things, right? But you would miss the finer details. You miss the finer details. But have you ever been in one of those little towns? And Carlos and I do this sometimes. We'll go to, and we'll just go into downtown Bowden and we just walk a little bit. Or the other day we went to downtown Wedowee in Alabama and we just walked a little bit. But when you're walking and really slowing down and taking your time, that's when you see things. That's when you enjoy things, right? Because you find joy in things when you slow down. You hit the details, right? You see the fine print. You see the smells. You see the sights. If you're flying above the clouds at a really fast pace, you miss it completely. If you're speeding down the interstate, you kind of see it a little bit, but you just get the highlights. But when you slow down and you walk and you take your time in something, you find the joy in things. And so a negative impact of this fast-paced life is that we lose our joy. You lose your joy. You also lose your productivity. You lose your productivity. The faster you try to do something, the less productive you are. You'd think it wouldn't be that way. You think the faster you do something, the more you get done. But the faster you try to do things, you're not really as productive, right? You have to pace yourself. You have to do things at an appropriate rate in order to do the job effectively, right? You might get it done quickly, but it's not going to be done thoroughly. It's not going to be done right. So you have to slow down and take your time or you lose productivity. So that's some negative results or negative outcomes of living this fast-paced life. I want to talk about a few examples from Scripture about Abraham and Sarah to begin with. Definitely a couple who acted in haste, right? They acted in haste. When we do things in a rush, we do things in haste, we open ourselves up to error. We talked about that. There's negative impacts from that. Patience is a virtue, right? And patience, that's when we find clarity, or that's when we find understanding that comes from God. And we know that Abraham and Sarah, they wanted to have children. And we know that Sarah was initially unable to conceive. And she made this quick and hasty decision, and she encouraged Abraham to be with her servant Hagar so that she could bear him a son. Right? And her actions, and of course, obviously I'm summarizing this, but her actions ended up hurting Hagar, the son Ishmael, and Abraham specifically. In the world today, we still feel the impacts, right, of this error. We still feel the impacts of this decision, this action in haste that she took to kind of take things, to take things out of God's hand, right? To take God's plan into her own hands. And there was negative result from it. And I'm not just going to put the blame on Sarah. There was blame on Abraham as well. He joined her in her hastiness. Abraham had received a promise from the Lord of his heir, his seed, knowing that it wasn't going to come through Hagar, but he went along with Sarah's plan anyway instead of waiting on the Lord. And so they demonstrated a lack of understanding about the Lord's plan and his righteousness. And Sarah lost faith, and she felt the need to act on her own accord, not slowing down, not seeking clarity, not opening herself up to God's plan, to God's time, right? There was never any need for her to have been in a rush because God's timing is perfect. God was working on her behalf the whole time if she had just taken the time to realize that. And that same thing applies to us as well. We never need to be in a hurry. We never need to be doubting. We never need to be fearing. We never need to be wondering how, why, when, right? Because God's plan and God's timing are perfect, right? We've been set free from those things. His plan and his timing are perfect. But Sarah acted in error there. John 15:15. I want to read here from just a moment. God doesn't keep secrets, right? It says, I no longer call you servants because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I've called you friends. For everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you, right? God doesn't keep secrets to us from us. We're called his friends, and he calls us that because we do what he asks of us. We're in fellowship with him. And when we take time to slow down and to have clarity through him, God reveals things to us through the Holy Spirit. Right? But we get in our head, we get in our mind, and we start doing things on our own, and taking action upon what's in our head that's not received in clarity from the Lord. And that's when these mistakes come into play. John 15:7 also talks about rushing a little bit. It says, if you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. See, God doesn't desire that we act hastily or in a rush to get things done, to get ahead of his timing and his plan, but he asks that we trust him in his word and his plan. And when we do that, when we abide in his word and his word abides in us, it says whatever we ask will be done for us. But we have to slow down. We can't be hasty about it. We have to take time to listen and have true fellowship and communion with God. So that's Abraham and Sarah a little bit. The children of Israel, also, we can talk about them when it comes to haste. We pick on them a lot. They're oftentimes a demonstration of things that we shouldn't do. But when we do things in a rush or haste, we forget to pause and give thanks to the Lord, right? The focus is on what we need to do, what we need to get, where we need to be, what we deserve. And we forget the blessings that we have from the Lord in the present moment. And God created the Sabbath for us to slow down. He created the Sabbath for our benefit, right? Genesis chapter 2, verses 2 and 3. It says, by the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then verse 3 says, then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. And so resting or taking time out, taking a Sabbath is important for us, not only physically, but also spiritually. And under the Old Testament law, when we read about the seventh day here, we know that that's the day that God rested. Under the Old Testament law, every seventh year was a year of rest. And God had promised the Israelites that they would be provided multiple years, 3 years worth of harvest in the sixth year, so that on the Sabbath year, that could be observed without concern for their provision, right? For the things that they needed for survival. But we know that the children of Israel, they disobeyed the Lord's instruction. And they were worshiping false idols, and they were living morally unfaithful lives. And the Sabbath was not observed for over a period of 490 years. 2 Chronicles 36, 20 and 21 talks about this. It says, or the results of that. It says, he carried them into exile to Babylon, the remnant who escaped from the sword, and they became servants to him and his successors until the kingdom of Persia came to power. It says the land enjoyed its Sabbath rest. All the time of its desolation it rested until the 70 years were completed in fulfillment of the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah. Right, the children of Israel, they ended up in captivity in Persia for the 70 years that the Sabbath was not honored. Right, the Sabbath is important. God's point was that resting or slowing down and honoring him instead of acting hastily or in a rush is important. God put it in there. God put it in scripture as instructions to us because it's important. Rest is important. Slowing down is important. Taking time to be with him is important. We can always look to Jesus to provide the example. Jesus took the time to slow down and rest. Now, we all think that we live very busy lives, very important lives, right? Everything that we do is important. We believe that. And we think that our success is dependent upon it and that people need us. Carlos was watching a show. I didn't think about this, but there was a show that was on this morning, I think, or maybe it was a commercial. And the guy said that he was just going to quit or then the whole company would fall down. And the lady said, you're not that important, right? You're not that important here. Despite our busy schedules and the fact that we take pride in it, what we do every day is we're not that big. We're not that important, right? We need to take time to rest. I don't think that any of us can successfully argue, even with our busy schedules and all the things that we have to do, we're not in more demand than Jesus was in demand when he walked this earth, right? So if Jesus could stop and rest as God commanded, you and I can too, right? We're not Jesus was in far more demand than we are right now. And Jesus took time to rest. Everywhere Jesus went, people wanted to be with him. They needed him, right? They sought his attention. Imagine when he was walking through the town, through the streets, and you had the lady that wanted to touch the hem of his robe, right? He was wanted. He was in demand. He was needed because she wanted healing from him. Imagine the mental load that must have taken on him everywhere he went, that he was in that demand. And Jesus knew that if he was going to fulfill the mission of God, if his Father, if he was going to do what he had been sent for, that he was going to have to take time to slow down and to rest and be alone with God. Rushing or being hasty about his work was not an option. Luke chapter 5, verse 16. Did I give you that one? I did. It says, but Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. Often withdrew. He did it consistently. He did it regularly. If Jesus can do it, we can do it too. Jesus did it because he needed to, because that was instructed from his Father. And so if Jesus can do it, we can do it. We read in various scriptures about Jesus going to the hills or to a lonely place or to a high mountain or to the wilderness or to the garden, right? Places where he could be alone, places where he could be in solitude with the Father, because he needed that time with him. Jesus took time to be with the Father either just before or just after all kinds of important events that took place in his ministry. Before he chose his disciples, he was alone with God. After John the Baptist was beheaded, after the 5,000 were fed, remember he went alone. After the leper was healed, after the transfiguration, to prepare for the crucifixion, right? Jesus withdrew right before key moments in his ministry because he needed to be with the Father. He needed to be with God. The Holy Spirit led Jesus into the wilderness for a time of silence and withdrawal after his baptism before the beginning of his public ministry. Remember, that's where he was tempted by Satan. Matthew chapter 4, verses 1 through 11. I'm going to read through this pretty quickly. I know we've heard these verses of scripture, but it says, then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. It says, after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. It says, the tempter came to him and said, if you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread. Jesus answered, it is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. Then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. It says, if you are the Son of God, he said, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. It says, Jesus answered him, it is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test. Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. All of this I will give you, he said, if you will bow down and worship me. Jesus said to him, away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. And verse 11 says, then the devil left him and angels came and attended him. Right? Jesus was alone with the Father. He prayed, he listened, he fasted, he faced down Satan. Right? He faced down those temptations. And when he emerged, he was ready to proclaim the message of the Lord. That's the powerful result of Jesus slowing down, of following the Spirit and spending time alone with the Father. He overcame that temptation. We all want to hear from the Lord better, and we all want to understand his will, and we all want to understand his direction for our life, but we don't take time to slow down, right? We don't take time to stop and to quit being hasty with our decision making and listen to God. We fill our mind constantly. We fill our mind with noise from the TV or with podcasts or with music or with news or with daily activities from sun up to sundown. And I'm guilty of that. When I lay down in my bed at night, I lay down and I'm immediately like on my phone usually, or I'm reading something. And not that that's necessarily bad all the time, but we keep our minds going from daylight to dark. Our Sundays are even, busy. We come to church and that's great, but then, we go shopping or we go do some kind of recreational activity afterwards, or we go out to a restaurant. Even our Sundays are busy. Our holidays are filled with parties and with gift giving and with dinners, right? Even a holiday is not a time to rest. And so as a rule, we don't take time to slow down and to be alone with God. 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 11 and 12. It says, if the Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. Go back one. It says, after the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And then it says, after the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. The still small voice that we talk about. But if we don't allow our minds to rest, if we don't give ourselves a moment of silence, a moment of quiet to be with him, we're going to miss the voice, right? We're going to miss the voice. We're going to miss the still small voice. We're going to miss the gentle whisper. It's that place of silence, it's that place of solitude that helps us to prepare for life's challenges. Martin Luther is quoted as saying, "I have so much business to do today that I shall not be able to get through it with less than 3 hours of prayer." Less than 3 hours of prayer. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know that I've sat down and spent a full 3 consecutive hours in prayer at one time, right? We don't take that kind of time these days in our culture, in our life. We don't. Jesus was alone with God for 40 days in the wilderness, right? Moses was alone in the wilderness when he heard from God through the burning bush. David spent time alone with the sheep. He was a shepherd, but he was out there learning that the Lord was his shepherd. Paul was instructed by God in the wilderness. John was imprisoned on Patmos. He went in a cave to be alone and be silent in the Lord's presence, right? God did great things through all of these individuals as a result of their dedication and time to slow down and spend it with him. So we need to learn to slow down. I want to give you just a few points before we close out tonight about how we can learn to slow down. We first need to learn to be content, right? Slowing down starts on the inside. Contentment is not in our nature. We're not by nature contented people. We're by nature very uncontent. We're unsettled. We're looking for something. But we can learn to be content. Paul said he learned to be content. We don't start out that way, right? But it's something that we can learn. That drive that makes us do things with haste is inside of us. So if we want to slow down, we have to learn something different, right? We have to make a change with that. People live with this idea that if you have more, you'll be happier, right? That's not true. But it's that idea in our life, in our culture, in our society, that if you have more, you'll be happier. And that's what keeps most of us going, daylight to dark, right? There's something we're trying to achieve. There's something we're trying to attain, right? And I got to keep going until I get it. Right? If I work harder, if I work longer, if I make more money, I'll have all these things and it'll make me happy. But that's not true. Life is not about things, right? Life isn't about things. We come into this world with nothing and we're going to leave with nothing, right? There's nothing wrong with having things. I'm not saying that. There's nothing wrong with using things here on this earth, but having more stuff is not going to make you more content. So don't let that keep you from slowing down, right? Because it's not going to bring contentment. People think that doing more will make them be more, right? Doing more is going to make them be more. If they do more, they'll be more appreciated. They'll be more respected. They'll be more admired. That's not true. Your worth is not determined by your work or other people's opinion of you, right? That's not where your worth comes from. It's not going to bring you content. The other thing that holds people back sometimes when it comes to slowing down and learning to be content is that people think that life is a competition. That's not true, right? You are very uniquely and wonderfully made. And for that reason, there's no purpose in trying to be like somebody else. There's no purpose in trying to compare yourself to somebody else. That's only going to end you up being prideful or envious or discouraged, right? People think that life is a competition. Don't let that slow you down from learning to be content, right? We have to learn to be content. The second thing we need to talk about when it comes to slowing down is that we need to listen before we speak. We need to listen before we speak. We are a society of interrupters, right? If you ever watched, any of you ever watched morning TV? I've been off a little bit for the last couple of weeks with my school schedule. And so there's an opportunity every now and then for me to turn on the morning talk shows, like the Today Show or whatnot. But one morning I happened to have on, or I was scrolling through the TV for a little bit, and The View was on. I'm not here to promote a show or disregard a show or anything, but there was so much back and forth. I don't think anyone on that set knew what the other person was saying, right? It was just a constant back and forth. Or sometimes when I'm listening to the news, and I listen to CNN sometimes, and they'll have a political panel on there. And one person starts talking and they ask a question, and then they're literally talking over each other. And someone eventually has to calm them down and, be like, stop, like you can respond and then you can respond, right? We're a society of interrupters. Proverbs 29:20 speaks against this. It says, do you see someone who speaks in haste? There is more hope for a fool than for them. All right, well, you can't speak in haste. You got to listen before you speak. You got to slow down. You got to be present in the moment. You have to intentionally listen to other people and what they have to say before you speak. Right? You have to listen before speaking. If we're going to talk about slowing down, we got to listen before we speak. The third thing that we need to do is that we need to get away from people. If we're going to slow down, we have to get away from people. Matthew chapter 6, verse 6. It says, "But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you." All right, we have to get away from people. The idea is to be alone with God, to be in a place of solitude and quiet with Him. People are distracting, right? People are distracting. Society is distracting. Technology is distracting. So we need to get away from those things. Susanna Wesley, I was reading, she's the mother of Charles Wesley and John Wesley, who were both instrumental in Methodism, and Charles Wesley wrote a number of hymns. But it said that she would sit in her favorite chair with her Bible each day with her apron pulled up over her head. And she sat there for 2 hours every day, it says, along with God. And they lived in a time where you didn't have big closets in your house to go and get in. You didn't have a spare bedroom where you could just go to, right? The house was open. Everyone shared bedrooms. There was a couple of common rooms. But it said that every day she sat in her chair with her apron pulled up over her head, and that was her alone time. And it said that her two boys knew that she was not to be bothered during that time. All right, but when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father. He'll reward you openly. He'll reward you openly. The fourth thing that we need to do if we're going to slow down is to obey the fourth commandment, right? To take that day of rest. It's instructed by God. He modeled it by resting himself. Jesus modeled resting himself and taking time to be with the Father. When we don't, we become tired, we're overworked, we're irritable, we're less able to reason, and ultimately less productive. We talked about those things. Rest allows us to rejuvenate our body, right? It allows our emotions to be reset. It allows us to refocus our spirit into worship. And so you have to plan for your rest. You have to make it happen, right? If we don't make it happen, then life just keeps going, and we just keep going in the little hamster wheel that we run in every day. We have to make it happen. We have to make a choice to rest. We need to pause and pray before we take decisions. Sometimes you pray over things for a few days or a few weeks, perhaps, or maybe even months or maybe years. Sometimes you just need to take 10 seconds in the middle of your day, if you're in the middle of a conversation with your boss or your supervisor, and ask him to give you guidance on what to say if you're in a conversation, right? Prayer looks different at all different times. But we need to take time to do that. We need to pause and pray before we take decisions. Proverbs 19:2. I think this is our last scripture here. It says, "Desire without knowledge is not good. How much more will hasty feet miss the way?" Right? God gives us things. God gives us answers. God helps us with the decisions that we need to take every day, but we have to take time to go to Him. How much more will hasty feet miss the way? Right? That pause shows that we're willing to slow down and just a notch in our day, and to get some guidance, to get some wisdom from God. I mentioned this. We need to get away from the entertainment. Talked about that, kind of being alone. We need to give some things up. We have to learn to say no sometimes if we're going to slow down. I struggle with this too. But we have to learn to say no. You can't be everything. You can't be everywhere. You have to decide what's important, right? Determine the gifts that God has given you and how they can best be utilized, and know what your strengths are. Know what's going to matter most. Prioritize what's going to matter most when it comes to slowing down. And we need to trust God's timing. Impatience indicates a lack of trust. And impatience is telling God that He doesn't understand your needs, right? And that He doesn't understand the need to get things done in a hurry and get it done now. That God has a plan, and our timetable is not necessarily God's timetable, right? But we have to trust God's time, because He acts in His time and not ours, right? Later is hard for us to understand, but we have to learn to wait. That's part of slowing down. I wanted to conclude with those thoughts, but I want to tell you a little bit of a story. Let me just say first, again, when we learn to slow down and not rush through this life, our health, our emotions, our overall well-being will be improved, along with our ability to be present with the Lord and to hear His voice. Right? Time alone with God gives us strength that we need to overcome temptation, to defeat Satan, to grow spiritually, and to be successful in the work that God has called us to do for Him. So time alone is important. This is the little story. And I've heard this saying before, friend, there's grass on your path. I don't know if anyone's ever heard that before. There's grass on your path. But it said there was a village in Africa where the first converts to Christianity were very diligent about praying to the Lord. And it said that each believer had their own special place outside of the main village where they went to pray in silence and in solitude. And it says the villages, they reached their prayer room, each by using a private path through the African bush, right? And when the grass was seen growing over one of those trails or paths, it was clear that whoever that path belonged to had not been praying very much, right? The grass was growing. We know what grass looks like these days in the South when it grows constantly, right? If you ever go into a yard, you can see if there's a little path that a dog or an animal takes consistently, right? The grass gets beaten down, it gets tromped down. And that's what would happen when these villagers would go through the bush, right? Their path would be there. And so when grass was growing along those trails, again, it was clear that whoever it belonged to hadn't been praying very much. And because the new Christians were concerned for each other's spiritual welfare, a new custom developed in this community. And it said whenever anyone noticed an overgrown prayer path, he or she would go to that person and lovingly warn them, friend, there's grass on your path. There's grass on your path. You're not spending time with God. We're called to slow down and seek the Lord. And so we need to be careful as we live in this busy life, this busy, fast-paced world that we live in, that we don't let grass grow up on our path to him. Right? We don't want grass to grow up and cover our way to him, cover our path to him. So just something to think about there. I've heard that phrase before. I never knew the origin behind it, but that's what I found. So we're going to close with that tonight. Thank you for joining us. I hope you take something from that. Slow down a little bit, spend time with the Lord, because that's what he calls us to do. We wish you a blessed evening, and we'll join you tomorrow for our Sunday service. Thank you.